I think most people hear words like blockchain, crypto, tokenization, AI, and tend to switch off. And I get it, because for too long this stuff has been explained badly. Too much jargon, too much hype, and in my opinion, not enough clarity. I'm Oliver. I've spent over a decade working inside financial services, fintech, and digital assets, and I've generally had the privilege to work with some of the most forward-thinking firms in this space. But throughout this time, one thing has always stood out to me, and that is the general lack of awareness in wider society of the genuinely transformative impact of these technologies and how they will affect most, if not all of us, throughout our lifetime. There is so much more to it than just Bitcoin and making speculative crypto investments. So I started this channel to make this knowledge accessible. I think for too long this information has been difficult to access and reserved only for those in certain roles and companies. What I want to do is to cut through the noise and give you the intelligence and information that actually matters, as best I can in plain English. So, let's get into it. I want to tell you about an interesting issue that I have recently discussed with a client. Now, blockchain is designed to be permanent. Once data is written to a blockchain, it can't be changed or deleted. It's always there. That permanence isn't a bug, it's the entire point, and it's what makes it so trustworthy. Now, GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, it gives individuals the right to be forgotten, the right to have their personal data deleted. That right's known as the right to erasure. These two things are in direct conflict. If personal data is written to a blockchain, it cannot be deleted, but GDPR says it must be deletable. So what happens? This isn't theoretical, it's a live issue that is affecting organisations across the UK and EU right now. And it is one that every professional who works with data, which in 2026 is almost all of us, needs to understand. The simplest way I've explained this before, and I think of this, is to think about the difference between writing something in ink and writing in pencil. You know, permanent ink is trustworthy, you can't go back and change what has been written, the record is reliable. That's exactly what you want if in a financial ledger, a property register or a medical record, for example. But GDPR says if someone asks you to erase their personal data, you must be able to do it. That's very difficult to do on a tamper-proof, immutable blockchain. To do that, you need a rubber, and permanent ink on a blockchain doesn't have a rubber. Blockchain is permanent ink. GDPR requires a rubber. And the question of how you reconcile those two things is, I think, one of the most interesting operational challenges in the digital asset space right now. GDPR's right to erasure, Article 17, it gives individuals the right to have their personal data deleted in certain circumstances. For example, when data is no longer necessary for the purpose it was collected, or when consent is withdrawn. That said, the right to erasure is not absolute. It doesn't apply when processing is necessary for compliance or with a legal obligation, or is necessary for the performance of a task that you carry out in the public interest. So the first question is, does the personal data on the blockchain fall within one of these exceptions? In many cases, particularly for financial records, property records, and legal agreements, it does. The second question is, what actually counts as personal data on a blockchain? This is where I think it gets sort of more interesting. So a blockchain will typically store transaction data, wallet addresses, amounts, timestamps. I've worked with all of these concepts for many years. Now, wallet addresses are pseudonymous. They don't directly identify a person, but if a wallet address can be linked to an individual, through data held elsewhere, for example, then it may constitute personal data under GDPR. Now, the UK Information Commissioner's Office, known as the ICO, and the EU Data Protection Authorities have both addressed this. Now, their position is that pseudonymous data is still personal data if it can be linked to an individual, which means most blockchain data involving real-world transactions is likely to be personal data under GDPR. So, how are organisations actually dealing with this conflict? And I've seen a few different approaches. The first is to keep personal data off the blockchain, store only hashes or references on-chain, and the actual personal data sits in an off-chain database that can be deleted. The blockchain holds a cryptographic fingerprint of the data, but not the data itself. Delete the off-chain data and the on-chain fingerprint becomes meaningless. Approach 2. Use permission blockchains. Unlike public blockchains, permission blockchains have a governance structure that allows data to be amended or deleted by authorised parties. Now, this sacrifices some of the decentralisation benefits but makes GDPR compliance more straightforward. Approach 3. Rely on the legal basis exceptions. When complying with the legal obligation, the right to erasure may not apply. Document the details of the exemptions and rely on the exception. So, practically, what does this mean for different professionals? If you work in data protection or compliance, the blockchain GDPR conflict is a live issue that needs to be on your radar. Any project involving blockchain technology needs a data protection impact assessment. I've worked at many different financial services organisations over the years, and whilst there is often a data protection assessment or a data protection impact assessment, I've not always seen this issue specifically called out clearly. I've not seen it often resolved clearly, and it's an operational issue. It creates questions that the regulator will inevitably ask. So it's an issue which really does have to be thought through carefully and a pragmatic, sensible solution put in place. Now, the questions of what personal data is stored on-chain, what the legal basis is and how erasure requests would be handled need to be answered before the project goes live, not after. Again, an issue in practice is retrospective resolution of issues such as this, which really should have been thought through right at the very start of a project, or a new product being developed, for example. If you're advising on blockchain projects, the GDPR analysis is crucial. Clients who deploy blockchain solutions without fully addressing the GDPR implications are exposed. Your job is to make sure they understand that exposure before they build. Now, if you work in tech or product development, the architecture decisions you make at the start of a project determine how GDPR compliant it can be. Keeping personal data off-chain using permission rather than public blockchains, where appropriate, they're not always appropriate, and building in the ability to handle erasure requests. These are design decisions and they are much easier to build them in at the start, like I said earlier, than to retrofit later. And if you're a business owner considering blockchain for any purpose, supply chain, property payments, records management, that GDPR question needs to be part of your evaluation, not as a reason to avoid blockchain, but as a reason to design it properly. Now, this conflict is not fully resolved. The ICO and the EU data protection authorities have provided guidance, but that guidance doesn't really answer every question. The courts have not fully worked through the implications, and as blockchain use cases expand, new questions will arise that the existing guidance simply doesn't address. But what I can tell you is that the conflict is manageable with the right architecture, analysis and documentation, and have helped clients in the past achieve this. Organisations are successfully deploying blockchain solutions that are GDPR compliant. It requires thought and care, but it's certainly not impossible. The organisations that understand both the technology and the regulation and can move in this space are the ones that will build the most valuable and most trusted blockchain solutions. Permanent ink and a rubber. The answer is to think carefully about what you write and where you write it.
Look, this stuff is moving fast, and the gap between the people who understand it and the people who don't is only getting wider every day. That's why I'm here, and that's why this channel exists. If you found this episode useful, then please hit the like button. It takes 2 seconds and it helps more people find exactly the type of content we've been discussing today. Now, if you want to keep up with what's happening more broadly, then please subscribe. Every week I put out content that discusses exactly the kind of shifts that we've been talking about today. If you want to go deeper than YouTube allows, then please head over to our website, linked in the description below. You can book a bespoke coaching session directly and over time access structured training materials. No hard sell, no spam, just the right conversation and the right information at the right time. I'm Oliver and this is Read Between the Blocks. I'll see you next week.